Hi everybody, my name's Tim and I'm a bat biologist. Today we're going to talk about bats. We're going to start with a little bit about bat biology and then we're going to look at some of the really cool tools of the trade that we use when we're researching bats. So let's start by looking at a bat. What exactly is a bat? A bat is not a rodent or even closely related to a rodent. Bats belong to their own order of life called Chiroptera. And what does Chiroptera mean? Chiroptera literally means hand wing. And when you look closely at the wing of a bat, you can see that the wing is actually being held open by the bones of its fingers. So that would be its thumb up there and its finger bones in here. So hand wing. Bats evolved about 65 million years ago and really haven't changed that much since then. There are basically two different types of bats: megabats, which would be including things like the golden flying fox in Australia that can have a wingspan of up to 6 feet wide. Those bats typically eat fruit. And then we have microbats like this one here, like what we find in Canada. And these are much smaller bats that are typically insectivorous. One of the neat things about the wing shape of the bat is that we see it in mythology. Particularly images of dragons have their wings replicated after the wing of a bat with the same fingers holding open the wing. In British Columbia, we have 16 different species of bat. However, here on Vancouver Island in the Comox Valley, we only have 9, sometimes maybe 10 species of bat. They're all very, very difficult to tell apart from each other when you're looking at them because they all look so similar. So to help identify which bat is which, we use an identification key, sometimes called a dichotomous key. And these are tools that are useful not just for bats, but for any kind of life, including plants. And the way a dichotomous key works is you start with a question 1A or B. So our first question here for identifying a bat is whether the ear length is greater than 28 millimeters. If so, you go to number 2. But if the ear is less than 28 millimeters, then you go to number 4, where it will ask another question. So in order to measure the ear of this bat, what I have here is a set of calipers. And so I'll rotate the dial here on my calipers to get it to 28 millimeters, which is right there. And now I can place those calipers down here by the ear and see whether or not those ears are greater or less than 28 millimeters. And as you can see, they are very much less than 28 millimeters. So that means, back to our key, that we now go to question number 4, which is over here. Question number 4 is asking us whether the fur is orange or rusty red in color. If so, then it's a western red bat. But if it's not, if the fur is not orange or rusty red, we go to number 5. And if you've ever seen a western red bat, you would realize that this does not qualify as rusty red. That's pretty obviously rusty red in the case of a western red bat. So then we go to question 5, which is asking us about whether the fur on the back of the bat has frosted or silver-tipped hairs, or whether it doesn't. And in this particular case, I have the bat facing upwards, and I'm not going to take it off to look at the color of its hair on the back right now, but you get the point of how a dichotomous key works. And some of the other features that we'll find by going through this dichotomous key, features that are important for the identification of a bat, includes things like measuring the length of its forearm, which would be in here. Or if you look really carefully, there's a little bone that comes off of the heel here, which is called a calcar. Whether or not there's a fringe of skin attached to that or there's not is important. Sometimes whether the armpit essentially is hairy or not can be important. Whether there's hairs on the fringe of the tail or not, those things are all important. And sometimes it's difficult to see them with the naked eye, so we'll use a hand lens like this so that we can get up really close and inspect those features to make sure that we're identifying the bat correctly. After going through the steps, I've determined that this is a western long-eared myotis. And that's pretty cool. One of the things I think that's neat about some of our long-eared bats is their strategy for hunting is quite different. Most of our bats use echolocation to detect their prey at night in the dark while they're flying. But some prey species, like moths, have learned, or evolved rather, with special features that are able to detect the echolocation call of the bat, so they know they're being hunted. And those kinds of moths can do one of two things. They can either drop to the ground or take zigzaggy flight to try and avoid being captured by the bat, or they can emit their own ultrasonic frequency that essentially cancels out the wavelengths of the bat's echolocation calls, making them essentially a stealth moth. And so some bats have evolved large ears so that they're not using echolocation so much to find their prey, but rather listening to the sound of the wing of the stealth moth flying. Amazing.
That is crazy.
That is amazing.
Holy
That is totally amazing.
So the bigger the ears, the better the hearing?
The bigger the ears, the more likely that they're relying on the sound of the insect rather than the echolocation sound. Bats use a variety of different kinds of habitats, and this is one example of that. This is the Puntledge River. A lot of bats are going to be eating the insects that come up and hatch in the river and come up into the air. Things like caddisflies, mayflies, stoneflies, and other insects like that. One of the reasons why bats are really important to people is that they eat insects that we consider pests. And a great example of that is the little brown bat, which really likes focusing in on eating mosquitoes. And each little brown bat, every single night, is going to eat its entire body weight of mosquitoes. That equates to something like about 1,000 mosquitoes a night per bat. Wow. Unfortunately, bats get a bad rap sometimes because people think that they carry disease or can make you sick. And that's generally not true for our bats here, with the exception of rabies. And only about 0.5% of bats in Western Canada carry the rabies disease. But it's really important that if you ever get a bat stuck in your house, for example, that you don't touch it with your bare hands, and make sure that your pets, your cats and your dogs are rabies vaccinated. Bats are nocturnal. That means that they sleep during the day and come out to hunt at night. When they're asleep during the day, they need to find safe places to hide from predators and roost during the day. And one of the most important habitat features for bats roosting during the day are dead old trees like this one that you can see here, where the bark is loose and coming away from the trunk of the tree. The bats can fly up underneath that and have a nice, safe place to hang out during the day. Other habitats that are important roost sites for bats during the daytime can include caves, mines, underneath bridges, or even log piles. Bats use echolocation to see the world. So what that means is they emit a very loud, very high frequency sound that's well above the range of human hearing. And the echoes from that sound bounce back to them. And what that does is it paints a 3D picture in their mind of the environment around them, much the same way that our eyes would paint a 3D picture in our mind about the world around us. And the accuracy of that echolocation image is so precise that they can even see things like a small mosquito flying around in the pitch black well enough to fly over and capture it. When we're studying bats, one of the things that we do is we use an ultrasonic microphone like this one here. This microphone is capable of hearing the ultrasonic sounds that bats make that we can't hear. And the recordings that we make with this microphone go into an iPad or a tablet or a smartphone of any kind. And what happens is the recording is made of the bat's location, the date, the time, and then from the sound of the bat that's recorded, the computer can even tell us what bat species it was. So this is a recording that I made right here in the summertime of a big brown bat. And you can see the echolocation calls are these sort of comma-looking features right here in the recording. And these closer together tight lines here are what we call a feeding buzz. So as it's flying around, it's doing its echolocation, and then as it comes in on an insect prey that it wants to capture, it does this feeding buzz so that it can see that insect more clearly. And so what the computer is able to do then is by recognizing this call pattern, it can tell us that it's a big brown bat, but it also enables us to play the song back in a range that we can hear. So the computer is going to shift the sound into something that the human ear can detect, and it's also going to slow the call down because these echolocation calls are really, really fast. So here's an example of what the big brown bat would sound like if we could hear it. So of about the 16 species of bats that we have in British Columbia, unfortunately, half of them are considered species at risk. There are various threats to bats, including things like habitat loss and destruction, even house cats feeding at night. But unfortunately, one of the most concerning threats to bats these days is the introduction of an invasive species of fungus called white nose syndrome. And white nose syndrome was introduced accidentally in New York State in 2006 and has been moving its way across the continent, killing millions of bats as it goes. Unfortunately, it is the largest wildlife disease ever recorded in North American history. And what happens is the fungus grows on the body of the bats while they're hibernating, and it causes the bats to feel itchy. And so they wake up from hibernation and to scratch. And every time they wake up from hibernation, they burn a little bit of body fat. And being woken up over and over and over again all winter long, eventually they deplete their fat stores while they're sleeping in hibernation, and they die before the spring comes. Fortunately for us here on Vancouver Island, we haven't yet detected white nose syndrome and our bat populations are healthy. But it's really important that we do everything that we can to protect high quality habitats for bats. So I would encourage you to reach out in your local community to conservation organizations and land trust organizations that are protecting habitat and support their activities. That's one of the best things that we can be doing to protect bat populations. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about bats and find them as interesting as I do. If you would like to learn more about bats, I would encourage you to look at the BC Community Bat Program website for more information.